How's it going, everyone? It's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's openings video, we're going to be talking about the Budapest Gambit. The Budapest Gambit is a queen's pawn opening. White plays pawn to d4, and black plays knight f6, a very popular move. And now after white plays c4, grabbing some more space, black's going to play this unusual-looking pawn sacrifice and play e5. This looks pretty strange at first. Black's giving up one of their valuable central pawns, and it's not immediately clear what compensation they're getting for it after white plays d takes e5, but we're going to take a look at what black's trying to do here and what kind of compensation they can get for this pawn sacrifice. Here, black's most popular move is knight to g4, simply putting this pawn under attack and saving that knight. And now, after white plays knight f3, defending the pawn, black can play knight c6. This is one of the points of the Budapest Gambit. It's actually not too easy for white to defend this overextended e5 pawn. So what can white do here? Black has two attackers on this pawn. If white wants to defend it, they could play bishop to f4. And if black ever took a break from adding pressure here to this pawn, for example, if black played a6, now white would just simply be able to play h3, kick this knight away, and white would be clearly better with an extra pawn. So black can't take a break. Black has to keep putting pressure on white and trying to win this pawn back, or put white under pressure in some other way. So a6, of course, makes no sense. Instead, black will usually play bishop to b4 check, and after white blocks this check with knight b to d2, knight c3 is also possible. Now black's going to play queen e7. We see that black just wanted to get this bishop out of the way so it's not blocked in by the queen, and now this queen is yet another attacker on this e5 pawn. Now white does not really have a way to add a third defender to this pawn, so it looks like black is going to succeed in winning their pawn back. White has a couple moves here, and they both lead to pretty similar positions. One is to play a3, trying to at least get the pair of bishops if black's going to win that pawn back, trying to coerce this bishop into exchanging on d2. Black can actually play an in-between move here, which is pretty surprising. Black can just play knight g takes e5 and not worry about this bishop for now. White actually can't take this piece, because then knight d3 would be checkmate. So that's definitely not what white wants. So after knight g takes e5, the main line goes knight takes e5. Once again, black can play the in-between move knight takes e5, not worrying about this bishop. The threat is still there. And now white has a couple options. If white were to take here on e5, of course now black cannot just take that bishop. Now white would just win a piece. But luckily for black, black can just exchange that bishop off with check, take their piece back, and black's doing fine here. Material is equal, and there's not much to fear. So instead, after knight takes e5, it doesn't make too much sense for white to exchange off this powerful bishop for the knight. Instead, white could just play e3, remove the threat here of the checkmate, and now after bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and black just playing d6, we're left with this position. White might be a little bit better. White has the pair of bishops and a slight space advantage, but black's position is certainly very solid here. Not what you might expect after that second move, e5. So if white wants a safe but small advantage, we saw how they can get that after knight b to d2. I also mentioned knight c3 was possible here, and the idea of this move is to leave a path here for the queen to come to d5 to defend the e5 pawn. So after queen e7, queen d5, white succeeds in defending that pawn, and black really can't add any more firepower there, so white is going to be up a pawn, but here black's going to still get compensation. Black can wreck white's pawn structure with bishop takes c3, and now black's just going to play f6, and acknowledge that white gets to exchange off this pawn. They weren't able to win it, but after e takes f6, knight takes f6, black is still getting good compensation. These pawns are weak, and black could get a lead in development here, with pressure along the e and f files. One of the lines goes queen back to d3. That's just a nice square for the queen. It's kind of hard for the knights to harass it there, and it watches over the weak pawns. But now d6, opening up the bishop, g3, castles, bishop g2, bishop g4, castles, and rook a to e8, and we see that all the black major pieces are bearing down on the e and f files. And after rook f to e1, black is considered to have pretty good long-term compensation for the pawn here. They have some pressure on the white position, and white's extra pawn is a doubled pawn here on c4. So it's hard to say that white's a full extra pawn up, it's kind of devalued. Nonetheless, computers think that black's compensation is a little bit insufficient here and white stands better. But in a practical game, things don't always go that way. Grandmaster Ivanchuk famously used this opening as black to defeat Aronian in the Candidates Tournament 2013. And of course, that's at the very highest levels of chess. So if you're interested in this line, I would encourage you to look up that game, Aronian Ivanchuk, Candidates 2013, although I think that game continued here with rook a to e1, but of course a very similar line there. So we've covered a lot of the main ideas there in the main line. Let's go ahead and talk about some alternatives. So after d takes e5, knight g4, knight f3, knight c6, we looked at bishop f4 trying to defend this pawn. White could also just give the pawn right back and just play e3, but now after knight g takes e5, bishop e2, bishop c5, we end up in kind of a similar position to what we've looked at before when black wins the pawn back, where black's position is pretty solid here. Black is fine, white might be a little bit better because of their space advantage, but black doesn't have anything immediate to fear. Going back here after knight g4, sometimes white plays bishop f4 first before knight f3, and this leaves some extra options open. A lot of times we'll transpose. After a knight c6 and knight f3, we get right back to the position we looked at, but black has the extra option here to play g5 and really lash out and attack that bishop. The main line here would be bishop g3 and now bishop g7, and black uses this gain of tempo to attack this pawn with the bishop, something they don't often get to do in the main line. After knight f3 and knight c6, white really has no way to defend this pawn when this bishop gets to help out, so white just plays knight c3 and keeps developing, and concedes that black is going to get this pawn back, and after knight g takes e5, the knights are exchanged, and we're left with this position. White should probably play e3 to defend the c4 pawn, and it's not clear if this g5 pawn is a weakness or a strength. It's definitely going to make it harder for this king to feel secure if black wants to castle kingside, but black could also consider playing h5 and h4, trying to get some pressure here on the king side. So we've looked at bishop f4 here, we've looked at knight f3 here. Also, e4 is a very interesting option here for white, just giving this pawn back right away with the idea to get a big space advantage after knight takes e5 and f4. Of course, this weakens the king a little bit to push that f-pawn, but white's definitely getting a nice advantage in space here. I'll just show one quick sample line. Let's say knight e to c6, bishop e3, bishop e4 check, knight d2, queen e7, bishop d3, and now the other knight should go to a6 because it really has no other convenient square, and from here it can influence c5 and b4. White has a nice space advantage, but black is holding white in check for now, and black's going to be able to just play d6 and finish up development pretty soon. Going back here to move 3, so far we've only looked at knight to g4, which looks like the most logical move, just putting this pawn under pressure. Knight e4 is also playable here, just taking some of these squares under control and setting up bishop b4 check at some point, but it hasn't been as successful. It's going to be harder for black to get their pawn back, and after knight f3 here, black can play bishop b4 check right away. If they don't, white will often just play a3 to remove the possibility. But here, after knight b to d2, for example, knight c6, a3, there's going to be some exchanges here on d2. Black plays queen e7, just like we've seen in all the other lines, but here white's actually able to defend this pawn with queen c3. And to me, it's not as clear what black's compensation is here for the pawn. One line continues b6, e3, bishop b7, bishop e2, castle long, and black has tried playing g5 here, trying to drive this knight away and win their pawn back. But objectively, it's hard for me to believe that this line is entirely sound from black's perspective. Finally, going all the way back to move 2, looking at move 3 alternatives from white, we've only been looking at the Budapest Gambit accepted with d takes e5. White can decline this gambit, but I would not recommend it. You have to remember that in a lot of openings, black's going to spend a lot of time trying to get one of these central pawn breaks in safely. So if black wants to accelerate that and make one of these moves unsafely as a pawn sacrifice, it's kind of a big concession just to give it to them. You really have to put them to the test and accept the gambit. If white played d5 here, for example, grabbing a space advantage, then black has scored well after bishop c5, just taking that c5 square that this d-pawn has abandoned. Black can also play pawn to c5, and we're probably going to get a check Benoni. White could take on passant, but that doesn't look too inspiring. You're just helping this knight develop. And now black has a space advantage and 2 pieces developed versus white's none. Certainly not what white's looking for in the first 4 moves of the game. Also, white could decline the gambit with something like e3, but of course this is very passive, and black has absolutely nothing to be worried about in this line. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please make sure you click the link in the description to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, and I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you join our community. I'm trying to help more chess players become masters, hopefully in a fraction of the time that it took me. So please visit chesspathways.com and sign up today. Thanks, and I'll see you there.